kind of want to race through my stuff and get to discussion. As I put together this talk, the more I worked on it, the longer I got, which is a terrible mistake. But I probably have about 35 minutes of slides just to give you my take. But I'd rather get through it in 25 and hear what you guys have to say. Your questions will probably be a lot more interesting. So you're here to compare the Twin Cities and Silicon Valley, and I'm Dan Frankowski. My email address is dfranco@gmail.com. And I'm going to be opinionated. I'm going to say things as if they're true, but they're just my opinion. I could preface every sentence with a conditional, and I will not, but you can tell me to go to hell in about 25 minutes. I'm going to say a lot of things that a lot of you maybe already know, but maybe some of it you don't know, so I kind of want to get us all to a common place. And here's my background. I've worked at 4 Twin Cities startups, Net Perceptions, Rossi Medical, Code 42, and Blue Shift. I've worked as a research fellow at the University of Minnesota. I've worked at Google and Amazon, and I currently work at Pinterest. I've been there about 4 years, and I'm a data scientist. So I have a lot of experience in the tech industry. I'm not a successful entrepreneur or venture capitalist, which is important because I'm going to actually talk a lot about entrepreneurship, which is maybe bullshit on my part. But I have been a band leader, which I'd call a low-paid entrepreneur, and a fairly successful one. I have been a successful tech employee at startups and established companies for about 25 years. And I can be a mentor and advisor. I put that on the slide to invite you to contact me if you think that I could be of assistance to you in making a healthier tech ecosystem for the Twin Cities. So about 7 years ago at Minibar, someone asked me, what can the Twin Cities learn from Silicon Valley? Because I've hung out in Silicon Valley a bunch. Oh, I forgot to mention, most of the time I've been working at Pinterest. I lived in San Francisco from 2013 to 2016. I just moved back in August. One thing we can learn is to have more Burmese restaurants. Mandarin is tremendously good. But I think that's not what that person was asking. He was a VC in the Twin Cities. I think what he was really asking was, what can the Twin Cities learn from Silicon Valley to have a better tech ecosystem? And what I told him was nothing. You can't learn anything. Comparing the Twin Cities to Silicon Valley is like comparing a campfire to a supernova. They're just completely different. And yet, here we are. This question has stuck with me for 7 years, and I thought, well, maybe something that I say will be of use to someone, so I'll hold the session because that's more fun. So here would be a Valley-inspired plan for a successful tech ecosystem in the Twin Cities. You'd have to have at least one big, roaring success and lots of startups. And let's look at what that might look like. So I would claim that the Twin Cities has no big successes and has a few tech startups. So here's what a big success might look like. First and foremost, a good story. That's absolutely the most important thing. Something that people can tell each other that's great. A $1 billion IPO would do the trick. A $10 billion market cap company. Market cap is outstanding stock shares times stock price, so it's an indication of how the public markets value your company. Something that's widely recognized. Think Google. It would have to be a tech company. Sorry, retailers. A product company, meaning not just consulting. Consulting is a great business, but you get more business, you have to add more people. If you're a product company, you can scale that thing tremendously with a small number of people. It would have to be based in the Twin Cities, and it would have to still exist. It can't be controlled data, that's dead. Cray, also dead. So think Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook. I put their market caps in parens here. Apple's market cap is $730 billion. That is a big company. Even Adobe, I barely use them. I look at PDFs. I know that a lot of people steal Photoshop, but they're $60 billion in market cap. They're big. I looked at the terabyte sponsors for Minibar. Code 42 is private. SPS Commerce, almost $1 billion market cap, kind of starting to be interesting. Lead Pages, I think they're private. Livefront, I think is consulting. Veritas, I believe they went private for $8 billion, so that's notable. But they came out of Stanford, and I think they're based in Mountain View. People here might be able to correct me. So no big successes yet, I claim. The thing about a big success is that it would allow people to meet each other. That is the most important thing. Take as an example the PayPal mafia. People who started and met at PayPal formed all of those companies: Tesla, LinkedIn, Palantir, SpaceX, YouTube, Yelp, Yammer. 4 of those people are billionaires right now. And they all met at PayPal. That's what a big success does. It brings people together. Paul Graham said, to make a startup, if you could get the right 10,000 people to move from Silicon Valley to Buffalo, Buffalo would become Silicon Valley. Probably just 30, if I could pick them, would be enough to turn Buffalo into a significant startup hub. He also said, I think you only need 2 kinds of people: rich people and nerds. Rich people invest, nerds build, done. So who's Paul Graham? He's founder of Y Combinator. Our companies have a combined valuation of $80 billion, so he knows what he's talking about. They have invested very early in companies like Dropbox and Airbnb, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so what do I think startups need? Founders, users, employees, very important. Maybe mentors, maybe funding, maybe an exit. So let's talk about each one of those 6 in turn. First of all, founders. The most important thing about a founder is that they are persistent. Actually, I took a lift here, and on the way here, oh, do you want me to use this?
Please, for the recording.
Oh, curses. Sorry, recording. The Lyft driver on the way here was a business owner in Cape Town for 8 years. And what he said is, don't give up. He had a grocery store. And then when he got robbed and he had to flee his neighborhood, he had a clothing store. He's not a tech entrepreneur, but he knows the basics of it, which is never give up. One story of CEO Ben Silbermann. Sorry if you ever see this, Ben. So Ben is the CEO of Pinterest, and he told me the following story about trying to get funding for Pinterest. There's actually a lot of complicated, interesting stories, but he talked to all the venture capitalists on the West Coast. They all turned him down. He said, well, I'll go to the East Coast, and I'll talk to venture capitalists there. That actually is already more persistent than I am. If I had struck out with all the great VCs in the Bay Area, I probably would have called it quits. But he goes to the East Coast, he talks to a whole bunch of people, they all say, no, no deal. I definitely would have quit after that point. He goes back to the West Coast and he says, well, can we enter business competitions? Are there competitions whose rules would allow us to enter? He enters a bunch of competitions. He wins a prize. That prize is something meaningless like $10,000 and a connection to a VC. He goes to talk to the VC. The VC says what they all say, always, which is, I'll invest if you can get someone else to invest, because they're all risk averse. He goes back to the West Coast VCs and he says, we're about to close our round, get in or get out. FOMO, fear of missing out, right? So he gets his money from the West Coast VCs, he gets his money from the investor he talked with. So that is extreme persistence. On a scale of not persistent to very persistent, Ben is out here. He never gives up. If you ask him, how do I know if I should stop doing my startup because it's not going to go anywhere? And he says, well, don't stop. Don't. This is the same thing Paul Graham says. Just stay alive. Keep going. So that is the most important trait to founders. There are a lot of other traits, and I'm not going to go through them in great depth, but it's a lot of interesting stories there. Find users and make them happy. I think it's actually a lot more important than tech. I put be young with a question mark after it because I'm old, and I hate to think of myself as done, but we have some founders in the Twin Cities. We could use a lot more. So my comparison says, in the Twin Cities, I'm not sure actually about ambition. I don't have a good read on the Twin Cities. Risk tolerant, I kind of tend towards no. The people at this conference are a self-selected group of people who are interested in new things. I think if you look at the broader culture of the Twin Cities, and especially Minnesota, I don't think risk tolerant. Young, no, we're aging fast. Hi, photographer. Minnesota is aging. Between 2010 and 2030, the number of adults age 65 plus is expected to nearly double. My better half, Melissa, asked, well, what about in California? Are they going to double there too? Which is a smart question. So young, I'd put in as a question mark. Let's talk about users. This is another thing that startups need. They need users. In the tech world, they divide users into two types, consumers and businesses. Consumers are individuals, they're people. And the most important thing about people is they want free stuff. They don't want to pay. You have to threaten their life before they're going to give you $10. They want free stuff. And so usually the plan for a consumer-oriented company is to get enormously huge, millions of users, and then sell ads against those users. Google's doing it, Facebook's doing it, Pinterest is doing it. And I think that business model requires funding. When you start a company, you need employees. If you use computers, you need computer infrastructure. If you manufacture things, you need to pay people to build things. So you need money. You need funding from somewhere. Whereas businesses are actually willing to pay. Big businesses will pay a lot. Small businesses will actually pay something, say less than $100 a month, if it actually solves a problem for them. And so in an area where we can't get much funding, I'll talk about that later, I think Minnesota businesses, Minnesota startups focus on businesses. So what I would say is we need way more users in the Twin Cities, way more. Let me say that again. If you take one thing from this talk, we need way more people supporting the startups, the tech startups that are in the Twin Cities. We need users like this. People who are intensely interested and excited to grab your stuff and give you feedback. Let me tell you a little story from the Valley. There's a company called Polycom. They make a phone, that little conference phone that you see in every conference room ever. They're based in San Jose, of course, because that's where startups happen. And I asked Jeffrey Rodman on Medium, hey, where did you get your first customer? Number one, that's what I'm interested in. How do you get even a single dollar into your business? And what he said was, through normal exploration and sales work, we found a number of soon-to-be customers. I actually don't know what that means. I don't know what normal exploration and sales work is. I would love to know. And finding some soon-to-be customers is amazing, but listen to this. Among them was one tech company that was planning to upgrade over 1,000 conference rooms. On hearing the prototype, they put their speakerphone plans on hold until SoundStation was in production. The first million doesn't always happen in one gulp, but here it did. So imagine you have a company that is large enough to need 1,000 conference rooms, and they say, hey, here's a company I've never heard of that's just started up, that's probably going to fail. Why don't we buy $1 million worth of their stuff? That is astounding to me. I am completely blown away by that. Imagining that happening in Minnesota is inconceivable. I co-founded a startup. I talked to Target, I talked to Best Buy, I talked to The Wedge, I talked to Peace Coffee, I talked to a bunch of people. They were all very polite. They never got anywhere near a checkbook. Now, you could say I'm not solving a problem for them. That's fine. Why don't they tell me some other problems that I could solve, and I would go build that thing? The appetite for risk that people have on the West Coast is tremendously of a different order than it is here, and it's very, very important for startups. So I was very excited to read this. Target teams up with Techstars to create Startup Accelerator. Because I wanted a startup accelerator? No, I have no idea if those things work, but because maybe Target would buy something. Maybe that enormous mammoth thing would cough up a checkbook. Super exciting. This article is in 2015. I haven't read anything more about it. When I went to their website, it looks dead to me. So do we have companies in the Twin Cities that are willing to buy things from people in the Twin Cities, or willing to suggest problems to work on in the Twin Cities? This is the most important thing, in my opinion, that you could do for the startup ecosystem here. I have heard from people who are in Y Combinator that there's an email list of everyone who's ever been in Y Combinator. If you make a thing, you send it to the email list, and all of a sudden 100 of the most important startups in the world are trying your thing. That's what a startup needs. They need users. They need people trying things, giving them feedback. Become a user, the most important thing. Okay, so here's my comparison with the Twin Cities. I don't think we try new things, and I don't think we pay for new things either. Okay, so let's talk about employees. I would call them ambitious tinkerers. They're early adopters. As soon as something new comes out, they have to be there at midnight to get the first darn thing and play with it. Whatever crazy ass virtual reality headset that's going to make you look like a goon, they're after it. They have a tremendously positive attitude to the point where I sometimes get nauseated. I'm from the Midwest. I am not of this culture on the West Coast, but it works. There's never anything wrong with positivity. I used to feel like if I promise things and then don't deliver, people will hate me. Guess what? People don't care. They just want you to be positive, happy, energetic. These people on the West Coast, they circulate a lot. The vesting cliff in a startup is often traditionally 4 years. If you don't know what that means, it doesn't matter. But after 4 years, you have a strong incentive to seek another company. And they do. They circulate all the time. And so people make personal relationships with each other, and they help each other because they know they're going to see each other again, not just at the company that they're currently working at. Again, I put young in with a question mark. At Pinterest, when I joined, there were 100 people. There were 5 people older than me. I'm in my 40s. The median age was in the 20s. So they're very young at Pinterest. I think the median age now is in the early 30s. Here's my comparison. I won't go step by step, but the Twin Cities, again, I'm uncertain about ambitious. I claim maybe in this room people are early adopters. I think the wider culture is not so. No, someone shaking their head, not early. Definitely not early adopters. Okay, let's talk about mentors. Now we're getting to the maybes. These are things that maybe startups need. And I put mentors first because if I were to do another startup, one of the things I would try to do is get systematic mentorship, advice, feedback from people who have been there. In the Valley, lots of people help each other all the time. The CEO of Pinterest, Ben, talks about going to other CEOs and asking them, what did you do in your company when it was 50 employees, when it was 100 employees, when it was 300 employees? How did you solve this problem? How did you get by that funding? How did you get advertisers to buy your stuff? And they talk to him. They love talking to each other and helping each other. Who knows why? Groups reach out to each other and talk to each other. I've been in Pinterest data science since there was a Pinterest data science. We've gone to Airbnb as a group and talked to their data scientists. We've gone to Dropbox as a group and shared experiences. Why? I don't know. That's the culture there. It's actually kind of fun. You should try it. Individuals help individuals. If someone reaches out to me on LinkedIn with a cold contact and they say, hey, I want to talk to you for an hour about data science. I say, sure, come and have coffee. Why not? And it's fun. So people help each other all the time, and they reach out for help too. So I am uncertain about this in the Twin Cities. I reached out a little bit when I founded a startup. I talked to people a little bit. Maybe I didn't do a good enough job of getting hooked up, but I did not find successful mentorship experiences in my situation. And maybe people in this room can speak to that. So let's talk about funding. My friend Luke Francel, who co-founded Minibar, 15 years ago, was at the Caltrain station in Mountain View because he worked in the Valley. And he said there's more funding in this one picture at the Caltrain station than there is in the state of Minnesota. That's Evernote, FriendFeed, iFi, and The Find. That's $270 million worth of funding in one picture. So the line people say, I got this from Drive Capital, Silicon Valley is the only place you can find and retain key talent. It's the only place you can scale a large organization. It's the only place you can get the smart money you'll need to grow. It's the only place people will understand what you're building. And yet, Drive Capital believes otherwise. Their founding principle is the Midwest makes up 19% of the GDP and draws only 5% of the venture capital. There's an opportunity here, they claim. And they say it's more important to get near your customers. We decided to go where 150 of the Fortune 500 are located, where 25% of all US computer science engineers graduate, where 60% of the US population manufacturing base is within a one-day car drive, the Midwest. What's interesting is most of these companies are probably not in the Valley. If you're selling into healthcare or finance or telecom or retail, the headquarters are not in the Valley. So that is their founding principle. And they have money, real money. Drive Capital has a $250 million fund in 2014 and a $300 million fund in 2016. Now we're starting to talk money. Now it's for the whole Midwest. It's not just for the Twin Cities, unfortunately. It's not just for one office building in the Twin Cities. But this is real money. This might mean that things are starting to change. And what they say, and what I believe as well, the only way to give Midwestern entrepreneurs more confidence is to build companies that produce huge exits, by which they mean IPOs, acquisitions, etc. Drive Capital funds 2 companies in Minnesota, When I Work and Lead Pages. So I have a little more comparison of funding and exits. In 2015, Minnesota got 0.6% of the venture capital in the United States. I would not say that's very much. The funding practice in the Valley and Twin Cities is completely different. In the Valley, you let someone else fund your company, and I could tell a lot of stories about that. Here, what I see is people fund it themselves. They don't have money, they bootstrap. That means they start a small business and then they take the money that they're earning and they plow it back into their business. They don't get funding usually until they're profitable. So the funding practices are completely different. And I don't know about exits. I mean, I'm sure there are some. I'm just ignorant. SPS Commerce went public sometime in the last 15 years. Okay, so let me talk very briefly about the role of universities. So let me talk about the founding of Google. It was founded by 2 students at Stanford. They had an academic paper about PageRank. After a year, eventually Google drained too much of Stanford's bandwidth and the IT department kicked them out. Imagine this though. They're in the computer science department. They're basically sucking up all of Stanford's bandwidth to start this thing. And no one's kicked them out yet? What a supportive, creative environment where people can just do things and meet each other and make things happen. They finally get kicked out, then they get a seed and a funding round, and the rest is history. But they started out there. Another story, Yuri Leskovitz is currently the chief scientist at Pinterest, where I work. He's also just became a tenured professor at Stanford. So he is a professor, a well-respected, world-renowned professor, and he is working at Pinterest for real, not 5 hours a week. He works there 4 days a week. And he's trying very hard to get Pinterest to more broadly use certain machine learning techniques that he thinks would be useful for Pinterest. A final story about this, Net Perceptions, a startup that I worked for in the Twin Cities in the 90s, was co-founded by professors and students from the University of Minnesota. So the university can be a place where things start. What I read about the university is that they were planning a venture capital fund and they decided to scrap it, and they have a seed funding program instead, which means a lot less money. Guess what? I don't care. They're not going to be any good at picking companies anyway. Paul Graham again, universities are great at bringing together founders. But beyond that, the best thing they can do is get out of the way. For example, by not claiming ownership of intellectual property and by having liberal rules about deferred admission and leaves of absence. So this is the role for a university. Bring people together, be world class, get out of the way. So let's look at world class. Stanford is in a tie for the #1 computer science department in the country. The Twin Cities, University of Minnesota is number 29. Not great, actually not so bad. 29th in the entire world is not so bad. This feels like opportunity to me. So what can we do? We can support our university, try to make it world class, and we can try to push it to be flexible about allowing people to found things. And organizations aren't going to do it. It has to be people. Okay, so let me make just a few remarks about culture in the Valley. Young and ambitious, self-confident. I wanted to spend a minute on tolerating strangeness and quirkiness. I went to the restaurant where what they serve you for breakfast is a slice of $4 Texas toast with cinnamon on it. You know, it's pretty good. that toast is now $10 because it has something else served with it. They make cleansing juices. I lived by a place called TMI Colonics. TMI indeed. They have doggy fat camps. They wax their mustaches and ride their fixie bikes. Who cares? They're having fun. I like it. People get angry about hipsters. I do not get angry about hipsters. Tolerate quirkiness. And the people I know in Silicon Valley are ridiculously faddish. They jump on every fashion, every pop song, every new app. I have no idea why. I'm Midwestern and boring, but I'm telling you what I have observed. This is on the left. Well, one of these houses is the house I live in Minnesota, and one of them was the apartment I lived in San Francisco. Can you tell which is which? One of them, I actually really like my house, but it's gray, like all of the houses around it. The apartment in San Francisco was painted with 7 different colors. I saw the guy painting it. He had cans of paint hanging off of his belt, and he would apply them one stripe after another. I did a Pinterest search for houses in San Francisco and houses in Minnesota. They look very different. I tried to start to put together, but didn't have time to put together a collage of different things that I have encountered in San Francisco. This thing down on the lower right here is a streetcar from the Twin Cities that they got in the 50s. The streetcars in San Francisco are from all over the world. Why? I don't know. It's fun. It's quirky. Here is a little collage of the Twin Cities. So a few things about this. Again, I spent like 2 minutes on this, so I wouldn't read too much into it. But there was an eagle in my neighborhood in Carag, which is pretty amazing. There's some nature here. I cook more in the Twin Cities, but there are no people. I don't see as many people in groups doing things. Compared to this, I actually, this band in Dia de los Muertos, I was in that band. People get together and do things. Here's a parade in the Mission. Here's a giant pin at Pinterest made out of Legos. It weighs a ton, literally a ton. Why do people do these things? I don't know. It's fun. Oh, the thing on top. Every time I go for a walk, there's this dog sitting in the window with its face hanging out. Why? I don't know. How does that even happen? Owners let their dogs hang out the window. I don't know. Embrace. Okay, one final word about culture. How to get from a startup to a big success. The things that I hear people focus on are twofold: growth and speed. And this sounds like a cliche from every business article you've ever read, and it makes you vomit, but it's entirely true. I've been at Pinterest for more than 4 years. Every day, every week, relentless focus on growth at the executive level. The CEO, every day, how are we growing? How are we planning to grow? In early 2015, it looked like US growth was starting to stall out because we had a significant fraction of the US population. So we poured tons of effort, the majority of our effort, into internationalization, making Pinterest more appealing to people outside of the US. Didn't pay off for many months, but it's starting to pay off. There are more people using Pinterest outside the US now than inside the US, and we have continued an enormous growth because of it. People think growth first. Growth, growth, growth. How can we grow? And they think about speed. How can we go faster? How can we learn faster? Build faster? And I actually, I have lots to say about this, but I won't. But people ask you to go really fast and not break anything, which is stupid. You can't actually do that. But they have a relentless focus on growth and speed. I'm comparing cultures here. I won't go through item by item, but I believe in tolerating quirkiness. So I didn't actually have time to do a good takeaways slide, so this is just the placeholder. Sorry, it's lame. Support local startups, spread the word. When I work, Crash Plan, Bite Squad. Are you a customer? Become a user. Be more open to new things, quirkiness, risk, start something. Found companies, grow, go fast, seek mentors. And one other thing, I think there's probably something to the youth, despite me being old, unfortunately. So motivate, attract, and retain young people. What do young people want? Apparently they don't want cars, so maybe we should do something about being pedestrian friendly, just as an example. Okay, I have zoomed through that, and yet it still took 30 minutes. I apologize. Okay, now go ahead.
For people who are interested in questions of the culture of Silicon Valley and why it was successful, I highly recommend a book, Regional Advantage by Annalise Saxenian, urban planner at Berkeley still. It's a dated book. It's still in print, I think, but she talks about why Silicon Valley was successful and contrasts it with Route 128, which doesn't exist anymore. One of her themes is that Silicon Valley was really built around Stanford and Berkeley, and I think the lessons there are, one thing you can do for the metropolitan area is if you know any top 1% college students, convince them to go to the University of Minnesota rather than Stanford. If they go to Stanford, they aren't coming back.
Two-part question. One is, the internet is such a globalizing force in general. It's ironic to me that people in Silicon Valley have this hyper-local mindset in terms of the startup ecosystem and being averse to investing out of market and working with out-of-market companies and things of that nature. What impact do you see internet communities like Product Hunt, Hacker News, whatever, doing to kind of flatten the geographic consideration there? Second part of the question is, it seems like a lot of the culture in Silicon Valley, you mentioned this in terms of quirkiness, but I think it's also quirky business models. It seems to be rooted in the history of the counterculture and the fact that it is an incredibly permissive place. Is there anything short of dumping vats of LSD into the Minnehaha watershed that we can do to substantially change the way people think in terms of what's possible and what a good idea might look like?
So should we dump vats of LSD into the water? I don't know. That has some interesting. I'm open to that idea. I don't know the effects. Is the culture influenced by the counterculture? Yes, absolutely. I don't have a lot of time to go into that, I don't think. And what was the first one again? Internet flattening. Doesn't appear to be, right? All the startups are still there. Funders don't want to get on a plane. Screw them. I don't know. Go to Drive Capital. Be bold. Sorry, you didn't have your hand up. You were just scratching.
Why did you move back, and why do we want to be like San Francisco? I did the same thing. I went out there, joined a startup, came back, and then they got bought by Microsoft. Like, I have no desire for Minneapolis to be San Francisco.
Yeah, so I moved back for family. And why should we be like San Francisco? Maybe we shouldn't. This talk is literally comparing the Twin Cities to San Francisco. So if we shouldn't, we should figure out how to have a healthy tech ecosystem in some other way because there's a lot of money in it. We'll be unlikely to be an extremely healthy economy if we don't have significant economic activity in tech. Oh dear, you've been around for a while.
I remember I worked in the Twin Cities that has been averse to remote workers. Is there a big difference in Silicon Valley?
Is there a difference in aversion to remote workers? So that's interesting. I was the second remote worker at Pinterest, and there was a huge, huge aversion to it. They did not want to do it. And I said, you know, do what you want. Like, I'd be happy to try it, but I got to go, man. And there was a fight, and then they decided to try it. I think we've both been relatively happy. But so what I would say is, if I look at the history of remote work in the last 10 or 15 years, what I see is going back and forth, back and forth. Best Buy says you don't need to have fixed hours. Oops, they say that's all crap. Yahoo says you can be a remote worker. Oops, Marissa Myers calls everyone back. IBM says we're going to bring everyone back or you're fired. Like, there will be flip-flopping until the end of time, and what you have to do is prove your value. If you're, and that's what I did. I had a good brand, internal brand at Pinterest. I'm like, all right, like I'd love to try it, but I got to go. And they're like, we better try it. Yes.
So you mentioned the university to tech scene thing, but also, so the Twin Cities has a huge concentration of like private colleges and smaller institutions that aren't like land grant universities, but are a huge player in our educational scope. How do you see that playing a big role in how that supports our tech infrastructure?
I haven't so far, but I might just be ignorant. Where are the startups founded by people from MCTC?
I mean, like McAllister, St. Kate's.
Where are the startups founded by people from McAllister?
Well, I used to work for one of them.
Excellent. See, this is what I'm saying. Maybe I'm ignorant. So what was the name of that place?
FizzDap. It was sold 2 years ago.
FizzDap. Great. So I'm ignorant of that, but that doesn't mean that it's not real. I wanted to say something else, and I forgot. Yeah, that's a good point. Elsewhere. You. Sorry, behind you. My apologies.
Yeah, so I'm from the Midwest, as you can tell, and I love it here. So some of the things you came back with family, what are some of the good reasons why? And I've been in the tech business for 30 years. I'm from the University of Minnesota. I love it here. I work for a very stable company at this point, but it was a startup at the point I started. Tell me some good things about the Minnesota tech system, the ecosystem. Not startup culture, just generally speaking.
You tell me. So I can tell you some good things. I actually met a lot of very, very talented developers, software engineers at NetPerceptions. And they came from a previous history, right? Like the first 3 engineers there were from Cray, and Cray was serious business. The friends that I made at NetPerceptions are the reason that I went to work at Pinterest, because 2 of them moved to Seattle and then moved to San Francisco. So one thing it appears to me is that we actually have talented tech employees in the Twin Cities. People focus on let's train more people to do tech, and I don't think that's where the problem is personally, which is why I focused more on the entrepreneurship. I feel like we need more people trying to found successful businesses, and they will find employees. So that's one thing. Do you have something that you'd like to mention as well?
Well, the fact that you mentioned family, but I think the people in Minnesota, generally speaking, my experience, it's a great culture. There are folks just like you mentioned in San Francisco. I can interact with anybody in this room. I think I have no problems with that, and I do that. It just depends on the kind of person you are.
Yeah,
you don't have to live in San Francisco to do that. You can stay here.
I love it. I love it. Excellent. So I shut you down, and I'm booting you back up.
I was trying to mention, it's been 5 years ago at the University of Minnesota, and there was a big push to do the opposite of what you're saying. They thought it would be a goldmine patent to talk to all the research labs and not let any professors or students run away with things, because the university wants to make lots of money by patenting all the papers.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So one of the startups that I worked for, Orazi Medical, was a startup out of a thing like that. There was a professor, and the university held the patent. And I think it's the case that the university has made some money from just a few startups and patents, and when those things run out, they get desperate for more money. I actually don't know the right answer. Like, I'm not a public policy guy, and I'm just opinionated. But so I think what's going to help is individuals making things happen, not large institutions. The institutions can get out of the way, but I might be wrong. Someone younger.
Okay, events like this, like Mini Bar, Mini Demo, and there's a lot of other events like Minnesota Bot Makers and meetup groups. How does that compare to like San Francisco? Like, are there a lot of community events, and how important do you think like events like this are?
What is the comparison of community events? This is a really interesting experience for me personally. I love Minibar. Minibar is kind of amazing because of the breadth that you can get. You can get bot makers and opinionated jerks like me in the same conference who have basically almost nothing to do with each other except for kind of an interest in tech and novelty and so forth. In San Francisco, all I have seen is extremely specialized get-togethers. Special invite-only lunch for VCs and data scientists. People interested in, well, data science is super hot, so like millions of like, use data science for this, use data science for that. But you don't get the kind of breadth. But I think there's just way more tech there, and so you can't have something that crosses everything. Is it important? It's important here, it's important there, it's very important. I'm actually a community supporter of Ministar, and I hope you all will become the same. John Roberts.
Sure. Back to your fundamental points about the differences between the Valley and here, there's no question. I used to hang out at the Red Line Hotel on Scott Boulevard in Santa Clara. And you walked around the bar, you walked around the restaurant, you walked around the lobby. The place vibrated. We've never had anything like that here. Maybe back in the controlled animals. But Dan, I think last year was a big turning point, for the local startup scene. There's no question there's probably 600 or 700 startups in our town. And more importantly, last year, 2 pretty good, semi-liquidity events. One, you talked about a little bit, Code 42. Code 42 closed a $7,500 round. That's a big deal for Minnesota.
Yeah, that's not a liquidity event for very many people.
Some.
Yeah, like 3.
And more importantly, of course, was the sports engine acquisition. The sports engine was bought out by Comcast/NBC. I'm not at liberty to tell you how much money they got. It was a big chunk.
So I'm delighted to hear that. It's interesting to me to compare. Facebook tried to acquire Snapchat for $2 billion or whatever, and Snapchat was like, F you. We're better than that. Like I'm just talking about the level of ambition and arrogance, drive, right?
Sure. Then last year, of course, as you know, you talked about one, Techstars came to town and did the Target digital deal, but they also did an interesting.
Did Target buy anything out of that, by the way?
They invested a couple weeks ago in one of the companies.
A Twin Cities startup?
No.
Yeah. All right. I mean, I'm still glad they're doing it, but I'm just watching, right?
Of course, Techstars also did a very interesting food incubator with Land O'Lakes last year. So, there's no question there's more stuff happening now than there has been for a long time.
I'm delighted to see it. I'm trying to raise people's ambition.
Right.
And I'm just an opinionated jerk, so. Yeah.
Would you say you have to basically move out there to experience it? I mean, or would you recommend it too? Like it opened my eyes moving out there. It was like, wow, like you're opening pictures, like that's real. Campfire versus it's a different level.
If you want to know what Silicon Valley is about, yes, you have to move there. Yes. I'm going to go to someone who.
Any ideas for Minnesotans to overcome our inability to be quirky?
Oh, gosh. I mean, the best idea I've heard so far is LSD in the water.
Garrison Keillor is our version of quirky.
Yes. I actually have a lot of really interesting stories about Garrison Keillor. I know someone who lives in San Francisco who loves Garrison Keillor to death. Spread the word. What I'd say is spread the word. Spread the word of the value of quirkiness. It is undervalued. People don't understand how much tolerance can make things happen. It's amazing how many things come out of play. People don't conceive. Yes?
I think people in Minnesota, well, at least some people, are pretty thick-skulled when it comes to quirkiness. I find that, and I don't know, it's just interesting to see how not accepting they are of just some funky stuff going on.
Let it in the back.
I want to say this. There are a lot of Minnesota companies who have a purpose in business to on startups. There are a few education startups. I know somebody mentioned Sports Engine too. and then Caring for Arizona is here somewhere. So they all have some purpose, and they are good tech startups too. I work for Virtual, so these are non-profit, and there are a couple of med device companies who are in the tech space who are 100 million plus too.
Yeah,
So it's just not smart things. There is also smart things like companies who are sold to Samsung.
I mean, Smart Things was founded by people from the Twin Cities who immediately left. Like Ben Edwards moved to DC, then he moved to San Francisco, now he's moving to Seattle. So I don't know if Smart Things is a Twin Cities startup.
In the Twin Cities.
Yeah, there was someone outside the Twin Cities. Fair enough. And so what you said about purpose-driven startups, I think that's great. I actually think that's a part of...
Can you compare that? And I'm not aware of any purpose-driven Silicon Valley startups.
That's because they don't exit for $1 billion, right? It's just a different thing, right?
So that's the culture difference that I want to say here. I'm not from Minnesota, but I've worked for a few non-profit startups here in the tech community, and I've also worked in Silicon Valley. So somehow there is a difference here which drives me towards this, even though I come from a tropical place.
That's a really interesting point. I don't have a quick rejoinder. And the other thing, you said two things. You talked about purpose-driven startups and then one more thing. What was the other thing?
There are also other startups like sports.
Oh, no, you talked about medtech. I actually think medtech is really interesting. I know nothing about it, but the interesting thing to me is there's already huge companies here, like Medtronic, that could potentially fuel a scene like that. I just know nothing about it.
There's quite a few happening in Mayo Clinic too.
Yeah.
So
I've heard, so I hear people talk about WFMC, world famous Mayo Clinic, meaning they're a bunch of starched, arrogant pricks. I wonder if such a thing will create a lot of startups.
But like Microsoft tried to start the Microsoft Health or something, and that's no longer there. So Google's Health is also not a big thing going.
Yeah, big companies starting things, not as interesting. If Google's thing fails, they still have ads. That's why Google's not always going to succeed. But is someone going to buy? Is the Mayo Clinic going to buy some startup software? That's the thing I'm interested in.
So Silicon Valley kind of has a reputation for not being a great place for women, and part of that is a startup culture. How do you import a startup culture without bringing that aspect here?
Yes, so Silicon Valley has a lot of problems with women, especially recently. So how do we avoid the same problems? Gosh, how much time do we have left? That is such a long discussion. We have 1 minute.
Diversity and inclusion is the next class. Presenter in this room.
I'm honestly at a loss. Like, I have so many thoughts about that. That's such a great point to bring up. Pinterest, I would. So I actually think it's great that there are associations that are helping. I think the majority culture also has to support. And that's a very, very important component of it. I actually think Pinterest has been a leader in that, and I have some stories about that. And things aren't great at Pinterest by any means, but there's a lot of effort and thought. There's executive attention on that issue at Pinterest. But how do we avoid that? I just don't. It's just too long of a conversation for a minute. I apologize, but thank you so much for raising that. I think we're out of time. Are we out of time? So thank you very much.